Hey, and welcome to Fitter Food Radio. So, this is a solo episode from me where I'm going to be talking about midlife metabolism and just what you can be doing in terms of your lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, supplements to really try to optimize your health and also just take steps towards the prevention of chronic disease, chronic illness. Obviously, there's no guarantees, but it's always good to know that we're doing the best job we can. And this is in amongst real life as well. So I'm going to give you some realistic steps that you can take and just a bit of information about what happens to your body. Again, I think if we were taught this in school, it would be super helpful because a lot of what we do from puberty into midlife actually does affect things like our bone density and our risk of kind of chronic disease later in life. But what's done is done. We can't go back, but we can definitely do some things now that, again, just trying to look after and protect our body as much as possible. So first of all, I just want to explain a few things that are changing. There's lots of myths out there online, especially with social media now and some podcasts. The kind of trend is to scare the bejesus out of you. And so you're kind of triggered into action. And often that involves buying stuff. It can be products, books, plans. And because there's just been this bold statement about we've now discovered that losing muscle is, sarcopenia, which is happening with age, losing muscle mass is now associated with, and then this big list, dementia, da, da, da. And these statements are, to some degree, there is a truth to them, but context is everything. And that's what I really want to explain to you today. So what's kind of happening naturally to the body? I think the biggest thing that we can all agree on is that we're probably in the biggest evolutionary mismatch in that, our biology is kind of wired towards living in a tribe. And so this is in terms of being in community with others, but also the level of movement that we'd have, what threats we would perceive. And so our kind of stress response in itself is more about looking for tigers and danger and being eaten alive than actually is worrying about our pensions. So there is this mismatch. So, but again, there's also several things that we can do to understand this and adapt our daily routine and adapt how we think about things as well. That's really important. But the other aspect is just how much technology has affected the degree to which we move. So there's just so much labor saving that's going on and the access that we now have to things that might not be great for our health. And that's probably the greatest challenge at the moment. Even just the access to the information and way too much information, which is again causing our minds to kind of scatter in different directions. And pretty much every client I see at the moment is asking about or undergoing diagnosis of some form of either neurodiversity or attention deficit disorder because they really feel that they can't focus anymore. They're struggling with brain fog, memory, and especially kind of short-term memory, not so much the long-term memory. So I just want to walk through some of the things that are really helpful. Also, just mention some of the myths that you might be kind of getting a bit lost with and thinking it's relevant. We don't want to waste time with a lot of the things that are being shouted about on social media when there's some key simple things that we could be doing. And also trying to remember that at midlife, there's this sense and feeling that arises of like, okay, first chapter's kind of done. The first part of your life is largely to some degree dictated to you in that, depending on your kind of cultural and family conditioning, you might have gone into a career of some sort and, just the way that your education pathway ended up, where you live, what's important to you. And at midlife, we can start to feel many people you all know about midlife crisis, but also this sense of like, oh, I've got all this stuff, but I just don't feel that fulfilled or like there's much meaning to my life or that I've got a real sense of purpose. And again, it might be that this is a point in life where we need to stop. And I'm going to talk a little bit about social and emotional health as well, and actually acknowledge the first chapter and what's been and done. There's a level of acceptance, maybe some grieving to do about things that we didn't do or have or get, people that we lost, and maybe time wasted. And this second chapter is when we could actually maybe connect with ourselves and start to think about what we really want to do, this is in terms of a career. And if your career has almost been kind of decided for you because of all your financial obligations, what are you doing outside of that? And how can you begin to be curious and explore, creativity, hobbies, pastimes, travel? There's always things that we can be doing, and most of them don't cost any money. And that is one of the benefits of technology now. If we want to kind of expand that mind and learn and grow and do new, acquire new skills, we have much more access to that. Sadly, what we tend to find ourselves doing, and there's a reason for this, is just kind of doom scrolling, watching Netflix, and watching, kind of really trash TV. I'm fully with you on this, and I'm like, why am I watching this? And some of that is about, again, that drive towards like social connection and feeling some emotions as well. So we're picking media to consume that actually is trying to help us connect with our humanness and things that we want to feel, but we're not feeling them in maybe in life. So there's a reason that we do everything. We should try to switch feeling guilty and feeling ashamed of some of the things that we're doing to actually being curious about why we're doing them. Is a completely different way of looking at stuff, even if that's that you're getting more negative and bitter and low as you age. Like, be curious about that and you'll find out the reasons why. Logically, you'll say it's because I'm tired of adulting and I don't know if I've got another couple of decades of this hard stuff in me. But actually you have, and you can get that energy back. But there may be some other things like emotions that need processing from the past, and a bit more joy and meaning restoring outside of your kind of to-do list and the things that the obligations and responsibilities we have to fulfill. But just coming back to your biology, so the helpful things to know, there's obviously this kind of slight panic that your metabolism is declining. And when we hit midlife, and this is probably more aimed at women, where there's also a lot of fear mongering around perimenopause and menopause. And again, a lot of whenever you feel an urgency to do something and make purchase, this is where we want to kind of like just pause and breathe a little bit and always be thinking about the bigger picture. There are great books, there are plans that are going to be really helpful, and there are supplements. But if we just start buying loads of this stuff, I've got many clients who've kind of come back to me after I've not seen them for a while, and they're like, I need an audit. Like, I've just bought all this stuff. I've got some joint pain. I've got this, I've got that. I don't know what works. Many now have these, as I've said before, these giant supplement stashes in their cupboards, half of which are unfinished and got given up on, but were, sold really kind of heavily to them at some point. So I'm going to go through the key changes that are happening for your physiology that you want to know about, and lifestyle is probably most important for a lot of those. And I've covered supplements in a previous podcast, but I'll touch on those as well. So the first thing to understand is, you might be thinking, does my metabolism decline with age? But technically, a few things are happening. So the first is that we are losing muscle mass. That's actually known as sarcopenia. This was thought to start around the age of 30, 40 naturally if we didn't, firstly, stimulate muscle, and secondly, resource muscle with adequate nutrition. Now, what's been really interesting is this is starting in 20-year-olds now, because again, as I mentioned earlier, the way that technology has led to such sedentary lifestyles and way more kind of labor saving across our day, but there's just so little reason to learn to be physical. And one of the things that's really important, whenever we're trying to bed in a habit, we have to really want it. We have to believe that it's important to us, and we don't have to enjoy the process necessarily. That does help. So finding forms of exercise we like is important. But some stuff like brushing our teeth, we just do it because we like having teeth. And this is the same. There are certain things that you're going to do because you like the outcome. But that is really important. And I think one of the things missing for a lot of people is an understanding of, if you do this, the benefit for you is positive in so many years' time. There's a delayed gratification. So just coming back to your sarcopenia, if we're losing muscle mass as we age, it just becomes more important to, as I said before, stimulate muscle. And one of the easiest ways that we could be doing this is just obviously adding in more movement across our day. But if you can manage between 1 and 3 strength training sessions, where ideally you're doing more kind of functional strength as well, using, Matt is going to do a whole session on what a decent gym session could look like now, where we train the whole body. Most people have very little time nowadays. And one of his struggles is often show people, like 20 minutes in the gym, you can tick so many boxes, and you only need to do it 1 to 2 times a week. The rest of it is really looking at, especially if you're thinking about weight gain, that we have got the appropriate energy intake and we've got the appropriate nutrients going in and we've got some low level movement happening outside of the gym. So most people over focus on what they can do in the gym and underestimate what's achieved outside of it, or fall into extremes with that. So again, just going on diets rather than thinking about simple ways to get an energy appropriate plate in front of you that you enjoy eating. There are like easy, in some ways it's easier than ever because of food reformulation. We've got lighter dairy products, we've got protein powders. So some of these things are now easier. But of course, there are other drivers to eat. So that emotional piece might be coming in here as well. And also a thing to consider is over-exercising will often contribute towards that. So again, if we go into a panic at midlife, I'm gaining weight, I'm going to start doing marathons, running, ultras, we do tend to see, Matt and I see this a lot in clients, that naturally they increase their energy intake without even realizing it. There's a lot of complacency around exercise. There's also the increased appetite, plus the stress that's going on. And it doesn't take much nowadays to just tip a bit too much olive oil into the pan, peanut butter, go back for seconds of healthy food, and suddenly we're kind of in an energy excess, or an equilibrium is quite common. So clients will sometimes come to us because they're doing everything and not losing weight. So we often explain to them that what we want to do in midlife is this body recompositioning, where we are supporting the maintenance and ideally the growth of lean muscle mass and keeping just enough body fat. And sometimes that's maybe a kilo more than you would like. And I emphasize that because body image narrative can be really strong, again, especially at this time in life when we're becoming a little bit irrelevant, not as maybe, we're not out there. I'm going to skip over this bit, but you know what I mean. It's when we're younger, we have like this pressure, and we're maybe trying to meet somebody, and it changes a little bit in midlife. And one thing that I think is really helpful with body image is actually developing a degree of neutrality with the whole thing, because really we want our body to be healthy, want it to be functional, and we want to be like really connected with it and feeling just at home and safe in it. And that in itself can be a big challenge for many of my clients. And when we're talking about body recompositioning, we want just enough body fat to have optimal hormones, for example. So there's always this feedback of how much body fat we have to the brain, that it's kind of safe to have some nice to have things going on in the body, one of which is our libido. So when we're starting to see changes in that, it's multifaceted, but one thing to always think about is, are you undernourished? And that undernutrition could be lack of nutrients and lack of energy. And energy requirement is tops here when it comes to hormone health. And everyone agrees with that. When you look at people who overtrain that and start to see this low hormone profile, it's often linked to just not getting enough energy in, and obviously not enough rest and recovery as well. So that's really important. And so we want to come back and just start to think about, how do I start to build and maintain muscle across in terms of my exercise. And something that I just mentioned then was, remember, we're building the muscle outside of the exercise window. And when we're in the gym, we're breaking down muscle, we have stress hormones high. This is really beneficial. We're telling the body, in life, I need to carry weights. So when you're in the gym, you just want to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of training those larger muscles. Also, if we're doing compound movements using multiple joints and muscles, we start to also strengthen things like tendons and ligaments. And that's really helpful for, if you think about sarcopenia, we're losing muscle mass. If we start to lose tendons and ligaments, these smaller joints, they really do affect our quality of life, because it's things like your ankles, your Achilles, your wrists, your hands. And of course, many of you will know, if you've had injuries in these areas, it becomes really debilitating. So we want to be strengthening these in terms of, so the stimulus is in the gym. And as I've said, Matt's going to cover more on how to do that. And then outside of that, we're resting for sufficient amount of time to have this anabolic time, where the body has responded to that stimulus and starts to build the muscle. And then, of course, we need the protein requirements for that. So there's something called muscle protein synthesis. And ideally, we're hitting around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein, depending on what you're doing, depending on the level of exercise and your needs. per day, and that's per kilo of body weight, sorry, as well. So per day to be able to mitigate the effects of sarcopenia. But there's also something called anabolic resistance, which increases as we age. So it does get a bit harder to build muscle, which means we might need to just bring more awareness to it, pay more attention to it, and trying to get that kind of somewhere between 20 to 40 maybe grams of protein in at each meal is really important. And this is where I also caution you on fasting. There's just so much talk about the benefits of fasting as we age, for disease. I know some people think about fasting through perimenopause and menopause. But one thing that's important to understand is when you fast, we have a hormone release called glucagon, which its job is to break down body fat and fuel the body. This is arguably great. But once we've done some degree of that, then we have another hormone kicking in, which is cortisol. Then we have more hormones, which is adrenaline, noradrenaline. So our stress hormones are basically being released to break down our own tissue to fuel the body in a fast. So it can actually become, it is catabolic, of course, but eventually we're going to start to go to muscle reserves. So if you are fasting, you always want to make sure that you're hitting your protein requirements. And I would say on a regular basis, and even if you're shortening eating windows or you're decreasing meal frequency down to 1 meal a day, 2 meal a day, you may have to supplement with, protein powders, essential amino acids. Something else is going to probably have to come in to make sure that we protect muscle. And it is helpful to know because it's estimated that I didn't say at the very beginning that we are generally also prone to gaining body fat over time. So remember, if we don't do any of this stuff, we are naturally with age. Well, if you look at the kind of stats, and some of this is because we will move less and maybe eating patterns will change with age, but we gain between 0.7 to, I think it's about 1.5 kilos of body fat per year usually as we head towards our 50s and 60s. So that's like a natural change that will be taking place. And so we want to kind of mitigate that with the strength training, with the energy appropriate nutrition, with the protein requirements being met so that we can try to retain muscle and obviously kind of keep the right level of body fat consistent. And something that's helpful to know, there's this kind of myth as well that we want muscle mass because this is true, it's metabolically more active. So if we have more muscle, then at rest, we're burning more calories. But this, again, we have to be careful. This can lead to an aspect of complacency. People start going to the gym, seeing results, and naturally start eating more. And actually, a kilo of muscle allows you somewhere between 6 to 10 calories more a day. And it's quite hard, as many of you will know, to gain kilos of muscle. So essentially, even if you really work at this, you'll probably be able to add like a couple of biscuits here and there. So this is where, again, we want to try to find this amount of nutrition is right for me. It feels okay. I'm not too hungry. I'm not craving food. I'm not thinking about food. And if this is a struggle, then we might want to go back and revisit the kind of emotional aspects of eating. This is an area that I focus in a lot now with clients because many of them are stress eaters, comfort eaters, and even just almost an autopilot. Like every time there's an emotion coming that they don't even sometimes realize they don't want to feel, they are straight at the fridge. So this is something that I help them to understand, that actually there are practices to help you sit with the emotion just before. If you slow your day down a bit, we end up, opening the biscuits, opening whatever it is. And of course, there's no off switch once we go in. We're chasing a state, we're chasing an override. We want that dopamine hit. We don't want to feel something else. And the kind of false belief is often that you're going to have to overturn your life and solve all your problems to be able to break the cycle of emotional eating. You actually do not at all. Many of my clients, we just start walking towards what makes them feel comfortable. And even the food themselves, that I often suggest, having the food there in the cupboard and not fearing it, like actually starting to improve your relationship with being around foods rather than like, I can't have any of that in the house. I don't trust myself. So some of these things at midlife, we really want to walk towards and finally just put that stuff to bed. And that's really important. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the key things that we want to be doing. Just to recap, is obviously we're losing muscle mass. We're going to be prone to gaining a little bit more weight with age. And with that loss of muscle mass, we are more prone to injury because we're also going to have weaker tendons and ligaments which stabilize our joints. So again, a trip or fall may be more damaging to the body. This is really important to understand at midlife because, if you have something like a hip fracture or break, you're 3 to 4 times more likely to actually die within a year. This is as you're much older. And again, with this information, I've seen many people hear this and then almost rush into a strength training program or something weight bearing to, I don't want to have osteopenia, osteoporosis. I don't want to be injured. I don't want to end up like my parents, grandparents in a home. I don't want dementia, blah, 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 blah. We kind of hear this information and it's helpful because we've got that awareness, but we want to be careful about rushing into something. Remember, we want this to fit around our life and be a lifestyle, not be a goal of, I don't want that, so I'm going to do this, because this is where we will often end up with an injury or, kind of burning ourselves out and actually falling off the wagon because it was too much and it was exhausting and we just wanted biscuits at the end of the day after all that. It didn't take a few more life curveballs chucked in and we're tipped over the edge. So these things are hugely relevant to lower our risk of chronic disease. Body composition being very high up on the list, but we want to do it in a way that's really compassionate with ourselves, fits with our lifestyle, and we're not super focused and attached on the outcome that has now become a stressor to us. It's just so like, okay, I realize I've reached this point in my life. I matter and I need to take care of myself and I need to take care of my body just like I take care of whatever else is you want to think about in your life. I need to put the right stuff in. I need to give it adequate rest and I need to, it's like our phone. We charge it. We, just make sure that it's got a case to protect it. We do all these things. It has the right apps. And when it gets too hot, we basically try to stop using it, So it's same thing with our body. We just want to have that ability to read the feedback, understand it, get some education in around its needs, and then maybe stop listening to a lot of the noise out there that's just, kind of confusing us and distracting us at the same time. So I've digressed again, but back to the list. It was, if you remember, we want to, so in terms of the muscle mass, we want the protein, the food quality is really important. But again, there's a caveat here. I don't want everyone to obsess about perfection, kind of a perfectionist standard here. We come across a lot of clients who their food quality is immense, but their energy appropriateness is not. So there isn't the caloric intake is way too much because there's lots of healthy fats. There is amazing home cooked food. There's lots of, home baked bread, and this is all amazing food quality, but it's too much. And so their weight struggle continues and their weight related health issues continue. So we often talk about the fact that actually using some functional processed foods, but they are still offering some degree of nutrition. And you've also got other ingredients within other meals that are highly nutritious. So you're not going to go without in that sense. You're not going to have insufficiencies, but some of those functional foods can add an element of pleasure and sustainability. This is where Matt and I kind of changed our take a little bit over time of looking at things like, as I mentioned before, low-fat dairy products, leaner cuts of meat, and you might even use protein powders and things like that as well, and sweeteners if that is if it helps you have that enjoyability of the food and you're able to lose and maintain that weight loss and tick that you've just covered the other things that I mentioned, protein requirements are met, and the bigger picture, let's just say, of all the kind of stress management, emotions and stuff as well, that's also going to influence your immune system and inflammation and therefore your risk of disease. So for some of my clients, this is where we have to really focus first, because they don't need necessarily another gym session, they don't need another supplement, but they do need to actually start to turn the mirror back on like happiness and, as I've said, meaning in life and purpose and all those things. So food quality, it matters, but actually your body composition is kind of coming first. So ideally we find something that really works for you as an individual, meeting those kind of needs that I suggested earlier. And then of course we want to have some pleasure foods in there as well. So this is where all or nothing, Matt and I see, just never ever works. But we have to be careful again, if you are prone to stress strikes and this is kind of your way that you will comfort and escape, you have to be careful that 80-20 doesn't turn into 60-40. And if it does, again, don't get stricter and harsher with yourself. Start to visit what's happening upstream here, and can I develop some practices and some habits and things in my day that actually help me respond differently to stress, get more perspective, not be so hard on myself, not go into this state of overwhelm and needing, food, alcohol, whatever it is to escape the kind of feelings that are coming up in those situations. That in itself could be where it's a skill that will really help you in terms of where you are right now and looking after your metabolism and your health going forward. And finally, just coming back to another thing that I didn't mention was obviously your risk of osteoporosis and osteopenia. So just like we have sarcopenia, our bone density can also decrease. This is for both men and women. And obviously with women, there can be this bigger shift and change with perimenopause and menopause as hormones decrease. But I also want to emphasize that this has been happening for time. But you would think many people now pathologize perimenopause and menopause. It's like it's something, again, to fear, so that there can be, money can be made out of the kind of the paranoia that people will feel about it. And whilst many women experience a number of different symptoms, many of the lifestyle factors that are going to make a difference don't really change. So as many of you are aware, as I've said, we want the strength training, and we also want the low level movement that's happening outside of that. And we also want to have that nutrient dense diet, meet those protein requirements. And specifically for osteopenia, obviously the drop in estrogen, which is really important for stimulating osteoblasts that build bone, that drop can increase risk of osteopenia. And if you've had periods of undernutrition in your life and possibly over-exercising, then you may already have some degree of osteopenia. And so the key things that are going to be important, as you probably already know, is your weight-bearing exercise and progressively, actually I really suggest, if you can, getting some guidance on that, because you want to progressively overload the muscle but also minimize the injury and fracture risk at the same time. And muscle and bone also crosstalk. I didn't mention that earlier. So as we're building muscle, then we actually see improvements in bone density. And a component that improves bone density is protein. So it's really similar, whether we're building bone or building protein, it's actually similar things that both of them will need. And when it comes to being, kind of in the gym, what I would say is really minimize impact work and try to think about kind of slowing everything down, getting some training on really good technique to, again, minimize that injury risk. And you might want to use a few more machines unless you can get someone to show you how to competently use some free weights as well. Again, Matt will do a little bit more on that. And micronutrients are really important for the process of building bone and building muscle. So specifically, just making sure with bone, we want to think about, of course, vitamin D3. I also suggest taking a K2, a supplement that has D3 and K2, and around 2,000 international units of D3, and that will normally have 50 to 100 micrograms of K2. You might need more, again, if you're not getting outside or have darker skin color or prone to insufficiency. So again, you could speak to a medical professional, of course, just reach out to us. And then alongside that, I often check clients are meeting magnesium and calcium requirements. Calcium is a bit of a tricky one, and you can use calcium calculators online. But with many people giving up calcium-rich foods, I often suggest, even though the supplementation of calcium is a little bit of a gray area, some people, I just suggest they take it. I don't know how they're going to get sufficient calcium looking at their food intolerances and the things that they need. If you wanted to, you can take eggshells. So some people actually keep their eggshells, grind them into a powder, and just take it like a half a teaspoon, gives you about 800 milligrams of calcium. So it's a decent hit. We put them in Hamish's food. I did take them for a while, but found myself dreading it. So if you can think about, eating sardines with the bones in as well, and food sources, dairy is one of the highest, and then you get a little bit from some vegetables. So use a calcium calculator to look at your intake and bridge that gap. And then magnesium is usually as glycinate form is the best absorbed, but citrate works if that's all you've got the budget for. And just sticking to about 350 to 400 milligrams of that as well. And then there's a lot of other micronutrients like boron, silica that we need for bones. So I do think it is a good idea to have a life stage appropriate and gender appropriate multi at this point. So you could have, there's often like a 40 plus male or 50 plus or menopause multis. Again, a brand that has good manufacturing practices and is third party tested for contaminants is what you'd want to focus on. So those are going to be kind of your most valuable ones. And creatine, actually, I didn't mention before. So creatine would be really helpful for both muscle and bone, and just generally even gut function and pretty much every cell in the body. And so just supplementing with around a teaspoon for most people is going to be adequate. Some people like to try more, some people do loading phases, but again, I haven't seen any benefit to most clients with that. And creatine, this is probably good to just talk a little bit about scale weight, because creatine does draw water into muscle. So some people do notice that their scale weight is maybe a little bit higher or their clothes feel tighter. This also will happen maybe as you begin strength training, and nothing drastic, but you might see again a shift in terms of as we build muscle, the scale weight can change slightly. So if I am not training, I've had periods where I'm not well and I can eat enough nutrition, but when I actually start strength training, I will normally put on a kilo or two and clothes will be tighter. And so that is just something to raise awareness of. I know that I haven't gained body fat. I've just gained a little bit more muscle. So again, just want to highlight that in case you have some clients who really fear the scales still. I think it's quite helpful at some points to, if you find that your relationship with the scales is just so negative and you can't stop weighing yourself daily and overthinking everything, remember that I'll probably get this stat wrong, but I think it's a kilo of fat is, I'm sure it's 7,000 calories. It's a long time since I've looked at that information. So, with the best will in the world over a weekend, it's quite hard to gain. Some people can do it, but a kilo of body fat would be, you'd need to overeat by 7,000 calories. That's your normal intake plus 7,000 calories. But what we do often see after a weekend is so much changes in the scales with, carbohydrate intake or alcohol, and that changes water balance and other things. So again, Matt's going to do a little bit more on that. So I'll park that for him to cover. And also a second thing that I just want to cover is this idea, I see this myth floating around about cortisol and weight gain around the middle. So when you're stressed, you're naturally going to see this expansion of your waistline. And I hear so many people say this and say it to me as like, no, it's true. When I'm stressed, it all goes to my middle and da, da, da. But one thing to understand is that the key thing that you will change when you're stressed is usually your nutrition and exercise choices. Just generally, we have to think way more than ever about factoring movement and low level movement into our day, because NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, has decreased massively, and especially in my opinion a lot more for my clients since lockdown, because so much stuff went online. They're just not going from place to place. Even working from home, there isn't the movement around an office, to an office, in and out of meetings. And that's another really valid point, is we're stacking work back to back to back. I've got clients who are just like meeting after meeting after meeting. They walk from their bedroom into the spare room office and stay there from sometimes 8 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, with a quick dash downstairs to eat, something on a piece of toast. And so there's so little movement going on that would have just been normally part of our life. We wouldn't have even thought about it. So our NEAT, we have to think about increasing that where possible. And it's where I often say to Matt, I'm going to walk to the supermarket. I'm going to walk and do that. I'll get my prescription from the post office, from the chemist, and I won't take the car. So think about actually finding reasons to move. And that's really, really important. But just coming back to the stress piece, what you'll find is if you've had a really stressful day, of course, there's less movement and you're more likely to order a takeaway, have some wine, have some processed food, and secondly, overconsume, because you're trying to alleviate the discomfort of the stress as well. So if there is another element that we might kind of consider, it's that sometimes we get more bloated when we're stressed because we have a delay, the kind of peristalsis of the gut can be slowed down. So if you find that there's like this fast expansion of the waistline, for most of my clients, they talk about being bloated and feeling really bloated. And this is because they're so stressed, they're just not going into parasympathetic rest and digest. They don't take lunch breaks, they eat their food too fast. So actually, when we start to turn towards some of these habits and, raise awareness pace a little bit more, slow down, take a proper lunch break, maybe a walk after lunch break to aid digestion, you actually see that the bloating can dissipate a little bit. So it's not always about the gluten, the dairy, the food intolerances. It's a lot about the kind of state of us as we consume those foods, and what's our nervous system doing. That's really important. So I just wanted to raise that element of cortisol. Cortisol can make you hold a bit more water for sure, but again, we'd be talking about a few kilos. If you've seen your weight jumping significant amounts, it's either in the energy expenditure or the energy intake that we need to look at. And it's just so subtle how those things increase and decrease that we're not aware of. And so it's helpful to pace yourself with the changes as well. So I've had some clients again who just jump into intermittent fasting once they realize this is the case, and create a significant calorie drop, which again soon starts to lead to a repeat of those patterns of overeating, feeling more tired. Because remember, we want enough nutrition that we have the energy, the cognitive energy to do our work, and the physical energy to go for our walk and exercise and do those things as well. So that's kind of like an overview. The final thing I just want to say about food quality as well is if we are slipping back into kind of processed foods. By the way, when I mentioned that Matt and I advocate processed foods and functional foods, these are ones that kind of help move the needle of all of the different aspects of your health. So it's that you're generally eating healthy with some minimally processed or partially processed foods that serve a function. You're able to, that they fit with your time frame. So having something like a ready-made soup from the supermarket is going to be a better choice than just kind of eating toast for lunch, for example. So there's ways that you can all do this yourself. Like, logically, this product is predominantly made from whole food ingredients. It's prepped by a supermarket. It's got a few additives in there, but generally it's got good stuff in. I'm going to have that, and it's going to mean that most of the time I'm eating healthy and I'm eating energy appropriate meals, and I'm not thinking about it, and I'm not having to cook for hours and hours and hours. So there are so many factors that that kind of influence that food choice that we can actually solve just by being a bit easier on ourselves and saying mainly whole foods with some of these, and of course the pleasure foods. And the other thing to note about the processed side is ultra processed foods, of course, but even some healthy foods that we might turn into, kind of banana breads or flaxseed loaves or whatever it might be. Once we refine a food by baking it, cooking it, grounding stuff, turning nuts into nut butter, that type of thing, the calorie extraction is a little bit more efficient. So again, that kind of movement back to whole foods can just be really helpful as a way that we don't have to think too much, but actually eating almonds rather than getting a jar of almond butter out might be just a real simple way that I know, a small handful, that's energy appropriate, whereas it's quite hard to judge spooning it from the jar, she says, with vast amounts of experience, how much I've had. And and it's very easy, as I said, things like cooking oils, another area, just sloshing oil over everything and not really being aware that we've just added 300 calories to that meal, and not necessarily gained much more pleasure and enjoyment out of it either. We could have just had a small, spray bottles are great for that. We have one, we just spray over the vegetables and then we flavor it with lots of herbs and salt. And these are just ways that we reduce the energy, so there's not so much pressure on us all the time to be, oh, I've had this, I need to go and move this amount. But as I said, movement is also a nutrient to the body, and it's not something that we should be neglecting and seeing as indulgent or, many of my clients are so generous with their time to others that they lose that window that they would have had for a walk, which would have given them, a real mental health break, some perspective. And that's why they often find themselves, kind of returning to the kitchen at night because of that flatness, that lowness. But actually the whole day was dedicated to others and others' needs and happiness. So this is kind of a nice bit just to finish on and segue into the social emotional piece, which, the studies on social isolation now are coming thick and fast, and they show that when we are isolated, again, with lockdown and the changes to working online, this has become a bit more common, that we're on our own for most of the day, not seeing many faces, or it's all through technology, that our risk of all chronic diseases, dementia and Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, stroke, all raises. because of the fact that our immune system knows that we are on our own, and we often see an elevation in a lot of immune chemicals to protect us. So even just having, kind of your pet with you makes quite a difference, or trying when you are chatting to people, do it through FaceTime, do phone calls rather than kind of WhatsApp and voice noting and things like that. Of course, there's a time requirement here, but if you FaceTime your best mate once a week, that could make quite a difference to your physiology, your biology. And if you stop on your dog walk and just have a quick chat with your neighbor, again, our nervous system is constantly scanning below consciousness. Are we safe, or are we at threat? Are we safe, or are we at threat? And so one of the things that's helpful to start to understand is getting a bit of perspective here, that when your, toxic boss comes online and looks at you, you can actually take a breath and start to laugh and go, I've built this up to be like life or death situation, but do you know what? Worst case scenario, I get a new job. You can really start to gain perspective of like, this isn't a threat. And having that nice conversation with your neighbor, which you don't normally have time for, is actually making you connect and feel safe, because you like that person and you felt a difference in your nervous system, in your wiring, in your body, in your biology. And the nervous system talks to the immune system and the hormone system. They're all kind of having this dialogue all the time. So a lot of things that we think are indulgent and just I haven't got time for that. This is for me personally as well. I've really paused. Whenever I hear that sentence, I don't have time for this, I stop and I make time for it. And it is often those things of conversations with people, barista in the morning, or, just in the supermarket chatting with a person who's serving me, and just making time. And this is what our system, remember, our kind of ancestral biology is used to, these nice interactions. So again, you might be busy focusing on your deadlifts and meeting your protein requirements, but if you're lonely, loneliness, according to the World Health Organization, contributes to around 875,000 deaths a year. So again, start to think about your weeks and, is there a bit more that you can do? This is where I mentioned, like, really midlife metabolism, optimizing our health and reducing our risk of disease is a lifestyle. It's what we choose, and it has joy in it. It has fun. It has creativity. So again, it's like, yes, we have the adulting part, but if you can just get that kind of window in the week, maybe it's only once a week, to go to, that class or yoga class, or go and have a cup of tea, or go and hike the hills on a Saturday morning. This is really important for us, and to be able to have that connection back to ourselves, which we might be losing because we have responsibility for now. It might be elderly parents. You might be thinking about kids, or have kids, sorry, not just thinking about them. You might have kids and friends. You might even work in a care profession. And so again, the stats around people who work in, either the medical world or another profession, I personally, as a nutritionist, experienced a lot of health issues, I think, were related to the amount of responsibility I had, and people that I was, supporting. Psychotherapists saying many of them have to be really careful about making sure that they have self-care factored into their day, in and around working with other people. And it's how we're then able, but you can't pour from an empty cup. But if you genuinely find this a massive struggle, and you're continuing down the route of kind of people pleasing, goodism, and giving your time away, then this is again another emotional piece that I would really encourage you to visit at midlife. This was definitely a factor for me, falling into chronic illness, and some of it was related to adverse childhood experiences, and just feeling like I needed to have kind of a positive value, or an element of productivity to everything that I did, to help me feel safe. So again, if that's kind of a strong program for you, it can be really helpful to revisit at this time, so that you can bring back in some fun and creativity, and really think about changing, maybe changing career. But if we're kind of locked into a certain mindset, and again, that can be because of events of life have really started to make our mind go smaller, then this is where I really suggest looking at everything from mindfulness to learning proper meditation maybe, but also some emotional education, which was a real game changer for me. So I could see my default traits and begin to step back and be like, what if I didn't? What if I did nothing about that and felt the utter sheer discomfort of, not intervening in that person's struggle and rescuing and fixing them because maybe they need that struggle, and just letting them know I'm here, but not being so proactive about the process to the fact that I've run myself into the ground, and making a choice to go off and do something that felt indulgent. But it wasn't. It's me actually enjoying life. And that's just the final thing I want to share. I have clients who are falling ill with all sorts of immune issues and gut issues, and they just go back to back to back with responsibility and end up kind of comfort eating and really struggling. And even with kids now, just, trying to protect them from this world can become a full-time job. And I have many clients moving their kids into various different hobbies and activities and sports. So they have no life because all they're doing is trying to kind of take the kids and get them involved in things so that they can live this life. But there's just a balance where you could just scale back a little bit, ask for a bit more help, delegate some responsibility. In one situation, the client had a chat with the kids who didn't even want to be doing half that stuff. They just wanted to play outside and go on their bikes and didn't want to necessarily go to all of these classes and lessons. So nobody was happy in that situation. And I guess a final piece I'll just say is I cannot emphasize enough the power of communication, especially within a family unit, or if you live in a household as a couple or with housemates and everyone's just rubbing each other up the wrong way and it's all getting very stressful, is coming together and having conversations coherently. We're a bit scared to do this stuff now, but having these coherent conversations can be an absolute game changer. Like, I need a little bit more of this. And I'm sorry I'm being, like Matt and I do this. I can be an absolute nightmare of a nag because I need him to kind of step up in certain ways, but he also needs me to step up in different ways. And we both need to chill out a little bit in different ways as well. And when we start to sit down and talk to each other coherently, we start to laugh about how we were building this into something that it absolutely wasn't. So that communication is really powerful. And the thing that we've both agreed is understanding what each one of us needs to decompress and have some space to come back energized and productive. And it's often, so walks are very important to me. Gym sessions are very important to Matt, but I also do things like meditations and nidras, and he knows lead me to that. He likes to do, kind of crosswords and wordles and doesn't want me nagging him at that time. Also, he likes to sometimes just sit quietly with a coffee. So once we've got those things communicated, we understand and we give each other the space, and actually we're so much kinder and nicer as well. And I just wanted to share that kind of final piece. It may be helpful. If you're finding it's getting a bit fractious at home, this is again because technology means that we fill every space firing up that phone. We're taking on information, and then we've got agendas that we keep dishing out all the time, and everyone just is kind of often a little bit upregulated in terms of nervous system, a bit fraught. So it doesn't necessarily help the situation. If you have any questions based on this, please just fire them over to info@fitfood.com. And I hope you found this useful. And as I said, Matt's going to be going into a little bit more detail on the exercise and movement side of things in a follow-up episode. And of course, if you have any requests of what you'd like us to cover in these podcasts, let us know.